You're listening to the Common Fan Podcast, a Husker football podcast for the common fan by the common fan.
Welcome back to the Common Fan Podcast. I am TJ Burkle, as always, alongside Matty Owens Sr. and Geoff in Lincoln. It's almost March, Common fans, and that means spring ball is nearly upon us. Is there anything better when you're reading the latest practice report, watching an interview with one of the coaches, or listening to the Common Fan Podcast than having a delicious, juicy steak from Certified Piedmontese? Or maybe you prefer ribs in the smoker, burgers on the grill, or a nice, slow-cooked beef roast for the Sunday family dinner. Whatever it is, you can find everything you need at your local Mercado Butcher Shop at 30th and Yankee Hill or 84th and Havelock in Lincoln, and also at 162nd and Maple in Omaha. You can also go to cpbeef.com to get certified Piedmontese products shipped right to your front door anywhere in the United States. Certified Piedmontese, powering the Husker football team and powering the Common Fan Podcast. Our guest today served as the managing director of Hail Varsity magazine, covering Nebraska sports for a decade. He's a member of the Football Writers Association of America, and most recently, he is the co-creator of The Counter Read, a new newsletter aimed at sharing great stories, ideas, and discussions around Nebraska athletics. We are talking about Brandon Vogel. Brandon, thanks so much for joining the Common Fans today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Excited to chat with you guys.
Well, we're very excited to have you. So we wanted to jump right in on one of your recent columns, for the Counter Read Newsletter, which all Common fans should check out, by the way. It's titled, "What Happened to the Huskers' Home Field Advantage?" Now, if I read it right, you were prompted to take a look at this issue after the Action Network put out rankings for college football home field advantage going into the 2024 season, and Nebraska came in at 120th.
Yikes.
Let's shoot us straight. Has Nebraska lost its home field advantage?
Well, there's a couple of caveats to that. So this is from the Action Network, which is, a site that is sports gambling focused, but they do really good college football coverage in my opinion. And it goes beyond just that, whether you're into that or you're not. I look at the point spread as kind of valuable data in a lot of different ways. And generally, like when you're looking at, okay, Nebraska's a 4-point favorite over Rutgers or whatever, that's factoring in 2.5 points for home field, depending on where that's at.
Mm-hmm.
So what this Action Network model does is it kind of adjusts that based on results over the past 10 years, but also the past 3. And the past 3 are weighted a little bit more. And Nebraska, I think we have a sense that what we've known basically from 2017 on, Nebraska's just straight up record. In terms of home struggles, that's a little tougher to pinpoint, maybe just off the top of your head, but like the big home wins, there's not a ton that have been there of late. So I knew Nebraska wasn't going to be in the top 25 or even the top 40 here. That said, I was a little bit surprised to see it all the way down at 120th, to the point where I was kind of wondering what's going on. And I don't have an answer. I kind of put forth my theories in that column that you mentioned, because Nebraska does stand out as a place that, like, it's still sold out. Like, the fan turnout has not diminished despite struggles of, the past 5-6 years, certainly the past decade, the past this century, depending on what your standard is. So all of that struck me as mildly surprising. So I kind of dove into, like, what could this be about? Why are the Huskers, and this specifically measures against the spread, which I know from a like on game day, you don't care about that, right? It's just like, did they win? Did they lose? But in terms of trying to measure how often a team performs to expectation above or below, it's useful. And they've been way better on the road over the past 10 years than they have been home.
Well, I definitely thought, Brandon, that your article is extremely interesting. But I'm kind of like
Is that,
you, like
Matt, is that because you're a degenerate gambler and you love the
no,
action network?
no, TJ. None of that going on here in the Owens household. No, I just, 120th. That's pretty dang bad. I mean, I wouldn't say we've been as nearly as good as we used to be at home in our home field. But basically, what is there? 125 teams in FBS. 100. I mean, that's got to be close to the bottom. Is my point. So I'm just like, I'm with you, like figuring out, okay. And I know you had like 3 theories on this, but I'm reading this going like, how did they calculate these rankings other than like performance, or like you kind of said, against the spread? And I guess how else would you measure something like that if you're not doing it by point spread? I mean, because otherwise it's just basically opinion based, right? Like okay, LSU's really tough, Death Valley at night, all that stuff. I just thought it was very interesting too, like you.
Yeah, and I think that's the way to try and measure it if you're serious at kind of getting to like, okay, we assume 2.5 points is kind of standard across college football.
Right.
Who is it actually that for? Who isn't it? And with the addition of Kennesaw State, there are 134 teams, I think, going into 2024.
Oh, wow.
The only power conference team that's below Nebraska in those rankings from the Action Network is Vanderbilt. Oof. And I've never been to a game at Vanderbilt. When Nebraska played in the Music City Bowl there in 2016, I went and covered their practices there. Pretty nice facilities, all things considering, that they're like in the middle of one of the fastest growing American cities that there is. But it's just, nobody compares the Vanderbilt home experience to what you get at Memorial Stadium. And if you look at Nebraska's straight up record, it doesn't look that bad. It's not as good, I think, as what you would expect or what Nebraska needs to get where it wants to go. But then you have to ask, well, you get a schedule, at least 2, non-conference games, which you're at very little risk of losing each year. That's just kind of built into how college football works. And then beyond that, you're subject to the Big Ten schedule. So in this case, using against the spread is kind of the baseline. Make things look worse for Nebraska, certainly. But I think it's actually probably closer to reality of the past decade of Husker football.
Gotcha. Fascinating. After looking at it and reading a little bit, Brandon, and your column discusses it in detail, but there's a lot of different theories that you float as far as why the Huskers struggle at home. And we all have our own theories. Obviously, I have my own. I mean, fans probably get tired of eating, warm cabbage Hot Pockets from Runza or the overpriced Valentino's pizza. That's my theory.
Okay.
Slander.
Sorry, Brandon. We got our in-house George Costanza here.
That's just my theories. But for you alone, do you have a specific theory or idea of why you think personally the Huskers have struggled at home yourself?
Yeah, I mean, so the first thought that popped into my mind was like, well, maybe it's just because Nebraska hasn't been very good overall. And so I went to
that's probably the right answer.
Well, yeah, and I went and tabulated their, against the spread record on the road myself, because that was kind of like my first check, and they were good there. Over the past 10 years, they were 15th nationally against the spread in terms of being better than the number that's out there. So that one was off. Then I wondered, so I started covering Nebraska in 2011, so towards the end of the Bo Pelini era, and I was like, Bo was a coach who really pushed the us versus them button a lot, in my opinion. And it's easier to do that on the road than in front of 90,000 adoring fans, right? But Riley wasn't that way. I felt like the Frost era was a little bit, or it became that way. And I don't feel the Rule era is that at all. So you got kind of this mix of approaches. So I kind of threw that theory out. And I kind of landed on what has been the theory that I have for why has Nebraska struggled. Again, your time frame may vary, but they haven't won a conference title since 1999, right? So we can take 2001 kind of on, and there were some good years in there for sure. Where Nebraska hasn't been the top 10 program it has been historically. I think that's fair enough to say.
Yeah.
Why did that happen? And I come back to this idea a lot, and I think it could factor into how the Huskers play at home, where like everything about being a Nebraska football player right now, I can only assume doesn't feel that much different than it did in 2001. Right? Like the facilities have always been great. The fan support is always there.
Yeah.
The stadium is always full. The attention for myself, like as a media member, I've been there with 40 plus people waiting to get into practice. And that doesn't happen everywhere. It really doesn't. So like everything about this, like Nebraska is covered and consumed like it was 1995 again, the whole time, which is great. These are all positive things. But as Nebraska has just kind of not gotten over the hump, never been able to string it together to be like, okay, this program's kind of getting back to where it's supposed to be. I wonder about the weight of that. And I don't know, like, again, this is still just a theory. But it's something that I kind of sense when I'm around the program or have at times of just like, everybody here is working so hard to get this back to what it is or what it was. What kind of toll does it take when you kind of consistently just end up a little bit short? And I don't know the way to like break through that if it's real to any degree. But that's kind of my unifying theory of why hasn't this worked at Nebraska, post basically, well, Tom Osborne, I guess, to that level, but
Yeah.
Greg Solich or Bo Pelini.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
It is.
All common fans. Go ahead, Jeff. Sorry.
Are you a Runza fan, Brandon? Be honest. This is a judgment-free zone.
I am a Runza fan, so
Okay.
I can't go with you on that one.
Most people are, Jeff. I don't know why you're on this crusade, but most people are. All right. All common fans can check out the Counter Read newsletter at counterread.com, and I would highly recommend it. I have to say, Brandon, to that exact point, that was maybe the hardest part to read. And it was sort of hard to read and not think about our overall slide as a program going back however long it's been, right? You could say it's 8 years, you can say it's 20 years, you could say it's closer to 25 years. But, about that point about, you say, quote, what if Nebraska's biggest hurdle to get back to greatness is the increasingly heavy weight of its past greatness? And you go on to say, quote, what if Nebraska has been better on the road because it isn't in Nebraska? And I got, as a common fan, that's painful to hear, but we can also relate to that. I feel like you can feel it in Memorial Stadium. You can feel it watching on TV. There's almost a desperation among the fan base, whether it's to beat Iowa to get to 6-6, or it's at the beginning of the year to hopefully start a promising new run. There's just this like hunger and desperation to get back to, I'll say relevance, even more so than greatness right now.
Yeah. And, I was a little bit nervous kind of writing those sections, and I tried to be very careful to like, I didn't want this to come across as like, look, the fan support and the media coverage here. Well, I don't care about the media coverage piece of this. The fan support here is the problem. Like, if you guys had stopped showing up a long time ago, maybe things would have gotten done quicker. Like that's not my point at all. So hopefully it didn't come across that way.
No.
But I've sensed it in Memorial Stadium too, and I think Nebraska's run, we heard all about Frost and the record in 1-score games, and that didn't change, this year with Rule, like maddeningly. And it just feels like things can really turn quickly, and it makes a lot of sense because Husker fans, particularly over these last 6-7 years, have seen so many like wins kind of, or losses snatched from the jaws of victory. Just bizarre stuff. And it would be more remarkable if there was no sense of that around the program and there was no sense of it around the fan base, then there being that sense, because that just seems somewhat natural and realistic to me with the way things have gone.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I know reading your article, the focus is, most specifically about the Huskers' performance at home at Memorial Stadium, but it sort of begs the question, just how did things ever get so bad? Do you think, is there one turning point for you, or do you think there's just several, missing puzzle pieces along the way, or things that are, too many left turns along the way, to where things got this way?
Yeah, it's tough to think of, and I've tried, like, this is a topic that fascinates me. And just like, I love college football a lot, like the whole sport. And I like thinking about how programs win, what they do. I'm pretty interested in the coaching mindset, and there's just, if there's a big thing that unifies Nebraska football and its struggles, it's not so much the changes in the coaching staff. There have been a lot of those, and it's tough to be consistently good when that's the case. There were also so many changes in leadership and the athletic director chair there. So, like, we go back to Bill Callahan, Steve Peterson kind of had this idea of, like, I don't know if the option era is going to continue working in the future. Like, here's my chance. Like, I think we got to go a different direction. As the guy at the top of the heap, he gets to make that call. And we know that, well, we don't know about the option piece of it, but in terms of the coach they selected, it didn't work out. So if there's kind of I don't know, I tend to look at everything post Osborne. Like, Frank Solich has gotten a very kind reevaluation. Not that his results didn't merit that, but I remember the day that he got fired, I wasn't working in media at the time. I was just as interested in it as I am now. And that's, it's not like there was revolt over that. I mean, not that there can be,
Right.
There were people who, I would include myself, who kind of saw Peterson like, maybe recruiting slipping a little bit. Maybe option isn't going to be like what you can be running in 2023. So we got to think about this. And he made that choice. And the thing I hear now from a lot of fans, and I've heard over multiple years, is like, the expectation isn't for Nebraska to be what it was from 94 to 97. And, that's very realistic, but kind of Solich and Pelini, in retrospect,
Yeah,
maybe they hit it. Maybe that's like what Nebraska's kind of natural state is in today's college football, where you're 9-10 wins. But the problem is, just like from a human behavior perspective, I think, like, fans of any team in the country are bound to get tired of being at one spot, because you always want to believe that there's a little bit more out there for you. So it's kind of the shifting times, shifting leadership. You think about the decision to fire Bo Pelini. We kind of knew that there was tension there between Eichhorst and Bo, but beyond that, like, the optics of it from a record perspective were really, really tough.
yeah.
But even that, at the time that it happened, was fairly split. We had the Bo leavers and the Bo leavers. So it's just one of those things where I think the timing of this all plays a major role. And I also think, like, the advantage programs like Nebraska have is they get the most swings at the plate with the most resources. That said, hiring coaches is really hard, and it's pretty random when you get down to it.
Yeah, this is probably not totally fair, and I'm not trying to take us down a separate rabbit hole, but I will remain convinced forever that it was like hiring Riley. And you could say that, you could argue we should have fired Bo or we shouldn't have fired Bo, but if you're going to pull the trigger and fire the 9-3 coach, you better go money whip a proven winner And Mike Riley's a really nice man, but he's a career 500 coach coming into a conference he's never coached in, and you're asking him to do the best coaching job of his life late in his career. Now, I'm not trying to let Frost off the hook. I'll never not be shocked at how the Frost era went, but sorry, I had to get that off my chest. We probably need to
calm
do
down, TJ. Calm
probably
down.
need to do multiple episodes on the poor decisions that were made for our beloved Husker program. But that's it for me.
Now, we've spent just a good chunk of time talking about, why we have such a poor record, and our home field advantage has just gone down the crapper, for lack of a better term. But let's talk about how we can fix it. And ultimately it lies with with the players and coaches. And there's a lot of different theories, I think. And you even mentioned it earlier, Brandon. You said just some of the one score losses were just so bizarre. And for a while there, I was like, it's almost like otherworldly. Like the football gods just don't want us to win. And so that brings me to the point of, is there any rituals we can do, anything that we can do to right the ship as Husker fans, whether it's burning old memorabilia that maybe we wore during games when we lost, maybe, kicking Bill Callahan or permanently banning him from the state. You don't want to know any of my personal opinions, because usually mine end in some sort of human sacrifice, and it gets really, really dark. So I don't want to go there. But for real, how do we fix this thing fan wise? Can we do this ourselves, or is it just solely based on the players and the coaches on the field?
Well, I wish there was a fan solution to this, but I honestly don't know that there is. And I think this is the hill that Matt Rule is trying to climb right now. And he'll talk about it. He's talked about it more than once, of and it sounds like a cliche and it sounds like coach speak, but I think it's really the thing of the guys just got to go play. And it kind of goes to the home field piece of this, where I think you kind of get some residual buildup of oh yeah, I remember when we almost had Michigan beat right before they were going to go on the run that would lead them to a national title in 2023. And then we fumbled, and there were still players on the team in 2023 who were part of that. So that piece of it, it's tough. My experience has been, when trying to write or talk about it in forums like this, is people get kind of iffy with culture. Some people just don't want to hear about it. I tend to think it's kind of everything at the college level. And particularly if you're a program like Nebraska, Nebraska's not going to recruit like Ohio State or Georgia or Alabama. It's just not. And I'm not sure it ever did, even when it was winning all the games that it did. So if you're not going to just out talent 98% of college football, which is a great advantage if you can do it, you got to have something else. And what I've noticed with the Rule era so far is he seems to be really focused on what I call the craft of playing football. If you want to block somebody and you're, an offensive guard, you just got to want to be good at it for the sake of being good at it. Mm-hmm. And that kind of ties into the theory that I had about home field, where there's so much extra stuff about Nebraska. Oh, isn't it amazing we get to play here? Isn't it amazing this? And it's all natural. But at the end of the day, you just need and I think Nebraska of the Osborne era into the Solich era had this. You just kind of got to be focused on being good at it for the sake of being good at it.
Well, it's more reasonable of an answer than the guy I work with. He's a firm believer that we just need to bring back jock straps. Apparently compression shorts aren't getting the job done now. He used to work in the athletic department, had those things out. Just a box of Duke jock straps for everybody. We'll right the ship. We're going to be good. Trust me.
Oh, wow. I love that theory, particularly knowing that he used to work there. Commit to it. Just be about it.
Just own it.
Is this the same guy that you were telling us was a dinner roll expert?
Yes, absolutely. The same guy. Yep.
Okay.
Nice.
Yep.
Oh, I don't know how much we can trust coming out of his mouth then.
Yeah.
King's Hawaiian.
Put Geoff in Lincoln on the pro jockstrap side of the
jockstrap duty.
Brandon, I was interested at your question about or at your statement about how much you love college football and sort of you're interested in the intricacies of it. I'm curious. I've kind of wrestled with some things as we look at the rapid changes in college football. And that's, the conferences that are not really what we grew up with anymore. And of course, the transfer portal and NIL, which makes it feel sometimes like, free agency on steroids. Even in the NFL, you actually have a contract. So once you go somewhere, you have to stay there for 3 or 4 years, which we don't even have in college right now. And there's some things that, it's sort of like this balance of like, if for Nebraska to be good, we have to be on the cutting edge of NIL. But at the same time, some of these things make you feel a little bit uneasy. I'm just kind of curious if you have any thoughts of like where college football is, where it's going. Is this still going to be the game that we all grew up loving? Now, my own belief is that it's impossible for me to envision a day when I see the boys in red running out of the tunnel and I see those helmets with the N on them, and I like don't feel the same old feeling, right? Like I feel like college football is so great for so many reasons, and it'd be really, really hard to screw that up. But I am curious in your opinions about your opinion about sort of the direction things are going. It feels like we don't know where this ends, and that's a little bit unsettling.
Yeah, we don't know where it ends. I guess the good news, well, I don't know if it's news. It's my opinion. Would be, I think the piece of it that you just connected with is safe, and that will always keep college football feeling like college football. A Saturday in Lincoln is going to be a Saturday in Lincoln, and it's going to, a Saturday in Tuscaloosa or Athens or Ann Arbor, South Bend. You know, it you can't you can throw up all the ads you want. You can throw up ads for like companies you'd rather not be there, whatever it is. The band's going to be there. It's going to be, you know, uh, a sport that's played attached to a university. And I think like for me as a consumer of college football, largely at home for the most part, watching it on TV, like I still get those feelings too through the televised game now. Um, you know, that said, everything around it, I think we are headed towards basically NFL light, certainly between the Big Ten and the SEC. Yeah. So I guess good for Nebraska that they're in the in group. And that part of it troubles me because part of what I love about college football is all the conferences. Like I grew up in like very far western Nebraska, much closer to Wyoming and South Dakota than Lincoln or Omaha. And like I love checking in on Wyoming football. They've got a great stadium. It's a beautiful place to see a game. All of those things. So it's always kind of troubled me as we talk through various playoff scenarios. And I know that like this is the state of the game. Like it is what it is. I maybe am unique in that, like, sure, I'll watch Wyoming Appalachian State on a Thursday night. Absolutely.
Hand up.
But like I don't understand why you don't go to a 12-team playoff and not include every conference champion. Like if I were doing it, that's what I would do. And like I'm not worried about whether or not the MAC champion gets blitzed in the first round. If they do, they do. But at least they had a chance to get there and play it. But it's all consolidating on the player piece of this, on the student athlete piece. So with the transfer portal and NIL stuff, like the pendulum was so far swung in the NCAA's favor for basically its entire history up to this point that I'm kind of with that piece of it. I'm like, let it swing to the other side, and it'll sort itself out. It's not perfect. There are pieces of NIL and the transfer portal, I think, as it relates to the calendar specifically, that need to get worked out and will in the future. But I think the good news is like you go to Memorial Stadium 10 years from now, it's probably not going to feel that different than when you went there as, say, a 10-year-old. And that's what we have and what we need to hold on to.
Yes, love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love seeing Matty O in particular was smiling at your talk. I mean, he's a consumer. He's a heavy consumer of Maction, Pac-12 After
Oh yeah.
Dark. Pretty much any. We all love college football, but I don't know how you find the time with your little children, Matthew. But
Well, that's why
he was
that's why the late games are the best for me, because then everyone's in
yeah.
bed and I can usually find a game. That's why I'm gonna miss Pac-12 After Dark. I hope there's Big Ten After Dark now. We'll see.
So back to the Huskers, Brandon, we've sort of reached that point where we've won the off season again, or we're winning the off season. The vibes in Husker Nation are pretty sky high. We landed Dylan Raiola. We filled most of the roster needs, several through the portal, but also, really good high school recruiting class. I think there's a lot of belief in Matt Rule right now. And then the other thing that's really intriguing for 2024 is how the schedule lines up, pretty dang nicely for the Huskers. So in your opinion, what's the ceiling for this Husker team in 2024? And, if you say 12-0, we won't run you off the show. I mean, that'd be fine.
Yeah. I'm too much of kind of stats and analytics adjacent to say 12-0 because I know how hard that is. But I honestly think the ceiling is double-digit wins. Now that's not where I would have Nebraska. I mean, I've kind of done a whole off-season suite of stories on counter read because this is like the stuff I'm really into, and I kind of like January and February because it allows me the opportunity to do stuff like this. Nebraska's win total opened at 7 and 5. I took the first SP Plus ratings from ESPN and basically kind of engineered them for my own purposes to come up with point spreads and win probabilities. That came out at 7.3 wins. So I think that's a pretty realistic baseline for Nebraska with this schedule. Is you're between 7 and 8. You get a little fortunate. I guess the way I put it in one of our newsletters was conditions are favorable for Nebraska to take a big jump right now. Like they have the experience, number 3 in ESPN's returning experience or returning production rankings. They were number 4 in those from Action Network, which tends to correlate with, a jump. So there's that piece of it. They've got the schedule. They don't have to leave Lincoln for the first 4 weeks. They're probably, there's a long time to go before we play the actual games. But right now, the probably favorites are close to coin flips in their first 7 games. So none of that guarantees anything. And I'm not trying to say it does, but like Matt Rule's time to like strike is now. And I think I get the sense that they kind of know that it's nothing you talk about with the players. I don't think in those terms, but your actions become like, hey, we've got an opportunity here. So that's, here we are in February. It's a long ways to go, but that's kind of the general setup for me. And like, if this were the opposite, if the schedule was really tough and they were replacing a ton of key people, I'd say the opposite. Like, I kind of don't have a stake in the game, and I tend to look at this information for like all teams in college football and be like, oh yeah, Virginia Tech, they're probably going to be pretty good this year because they return everybody and blah, 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 blah. Nebraska happens to be in that group this year. And so that's good. I think there are two, the big key thing, and we'll learn a little bit more about it as spring football goes on. What level of quarterback player are you going to get? Who's it going to be? I mean, we assume it's going to be Dylan Raiola. If that's the case, how good is your quarterback play? That might be the ceiling setter. In addition to all the stuff you kind of can't control, injuries, etc.
Sure. Well, Brandon, I'd love to get, I guess, some thoughts on Coach Rule. We've talked about him a little bit here tonight, but Coach has absolutely embraced being the head coach of Nebraska, maybe more so than anyone we've seen for a long time. He's all over Lincoln. The high school coaches in the state love him. He's popping in small town bars. He's at basketball games. Developed a little bit of a relationship with Coach Osborne. We on this podcast, and I think thousands and thousands of other Husker fans, think we've got the right guy. At least got a pretty good one. Do you think he plans to stay in Lincoln for a while? Do you think he'll be here long term?
I do. The best, I think, way I can relate that, when the news came out that he was Nebraska's pick, and I think he was officially introduced like a day later, was roughly the timeline with that. One of my first thoughts was, and you know, I spent a bunch of time, looking at various coaching candidates. It's kind of another passion of mine, of like seeing which coaches are undervalued or overvalued, et cetera, et cetera. Um, Matt Rule was clearly, in that group of people that um, outlets mentioned right away as a coach who was available, coach with a proven track record. But one of my first thoughts was like, okay, so if Nebraska wants to keep Matt Rule, they need to kind of root for James Franklin to stay safe at Penn State. It's where Rule, he grew up in New York, but he played his high school football in State College. Obviously, played college football as a walk-on at Penn State, and you just kind of connect the dots of alma mater. It's what happened with Scott Frost to Nebraska, right? So you always worry about that piece of it. Through his time at Nebraska, which is a little more than a year now, like I don't have that concern as much anymore. Like I get the sense, like, if Penn State opened, like you'd still be nervous about it, but I get the sense, like, I think he thinks he can do it here, and I think he has found a place that kind of gives him a good mix of like, okay, your ceiling, like if you get this as good as they can get it, your ceiling is Nebraska's historical ceiling, versus jumping someplace else where a lot of those things are often more in flux. And he's got a good relationship with Trev Alberts, and Nebraska, I think, as a place suits him as well, which is maybe the key thing.
Yeah,
For sure.
love that.
Well, you kind of alluded to it before too, and just talking about the ceiling as far as record goes, but in terms of just the offense in general, I mean, it's no secret that last year the offense really wasn't our strong suit, so to speak. For a lot of our wins, the defense is what kept us in us and got us a lot of those wins. But with the additions of Glenn Thomas as co-offensive coordinator, obviously Dylan Raiola coming on as quarterback, I think it's fair to say that we might see some, hopefully, significant upgrade in the offense this next season. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think we're going to see a significant change on that side of the ball? Hopefully.
Yeah, I think they'll definitely be better. Be careful here, because I don't want this to be read as a slight towards last year or any of that. But I mentioned,
we've been pretty open about our thoughts about the offense last year.
It's okay. If you go back and listen to a few episodes, it'll paint a pretty good picture.
It might have gotten personal a few times.
Fair enough.
Mostly in regards to Marcus Satterfield, but we weren't throwing any kids under the bus or anything. We don't want to go there.
Yeah, that's kind of the line. I think that's fair to walk. I mentioned one of the things that might help set Nebraska's ceiling, or hurt, I guess, is the level of quarterback play you're going to get. But realistically, when I step back and look at it, just from all three quarterbacks Nebraska played in 2023, like, how far down from that could you really go? Like realistically, I mean, just in terms of like team passer rating, some of the more basic production stuff, like it would be hard for Nebraska, I think, to not have, we get to the end of 2024 and not be like, well, yeah, the passing numbers look better. They've upgraded receiver. And I mean, they had a good young core. Problem was last year, that was kind of all they had, minus Billy Kemp, who I thought did a good job, but Nebraska struggled to get him the ball the way they needed to get him the ball. So there's that piece of it. I mean, from an offense perspective, like in college football, average team scores about 28 points a game, and Nebraska's, so I always use that as like a level setter. Nebraska's defense was 10 points better than that. Nebraska's offense was 10 points worse than that. With the experience they have coming back on defense, I think they can stay in that range. I think offense, it's very likely that they will improve. Their experience on the O-line, the key thing was I think they're certainly upgraded at wide receiver. We'll see a quarterback, but probably upgraded there as well. I'll be interested in the run game. For as much as Nebraska ran it last year, they were really devoted to it. Like, what's that look like if, say, Raiola is the starter and you have a little bit less of the QB run game in there? That's a little bit of a question mark for me. But yeah, I mean, realistically, if Nebraska's defense stays at 18 points per game allowed, like if the offense gets to 24, that'd be, so it's touchdown improvement per game. Like, you're 8-4, 9-3 territory at that point, based on, you know, the college football that I've looked at over the past decade.
Yes.
There's
Agree,
a lot
100%.
about this episode that's going to keep me warm for the rest of the
Yes.
winter and
I
into
mean,
Thank
I
you,
just-
Brandon.
The math doesn't lie here, guys. This is
Exactly.
just general in dollars and
Exactly.
cents.
Hey,
The math adds up.
I said it. 8-4,
I get it.
8-4 in 2024. 8-4 in 24, baby.
You've been saying that for a long time, Matteo.
Yes, sir.
Well, Brandon, you've been more than generous with your time. Real quick, tell us about the Counter Read newsletter. How can common fans find it? Where can they sign up? Why'd you decide to do it? Kind of anything you want to share about it.
Yeah, you can find us at counterread.com. That's where I and my co-creator, co-founder Aaron Sorensen do our weekly newsletter. Well, we send out two posts a week that are subscriber only, and then we usually end up doing 2 or 3, depending on if we're in football season or out. 2 or 3 free posts a week. So you can go there and sign up for free and get those free posts. And we hope that that's kind of a way in for people to test things out, see what we're about. We both have been on this beat for a little over a decade. So some pretty good experience there. And hopefully people want to become paid subscribers. And the approach really appealed to me. You know, it's a Substack newsletter, which kind of becomes the cliched thing to do when you're a suddenly laid off journalist, which we're not in the minority in terms of being in that group. But I kind of like just the honesty of it. It's like, hey, here's what we do. Here's the coverage we provide. You know, we're not trying to be like the news. You know, there's a ton of great journalists. You guys have had a ton of them on this show, covering Nebraska football. And some of them, you know, are that's part of their direct beat. We're trying to offer a little bit of a counterpoint, a director's commentary, for lack of a better term, to the stuff that's already out there, and do it in a way that gets directly to people. I really appreciate the simplicity of the selling proposition. It's like, here's the thing we make. If you like it, love it. We'd love to have you hop in. We have a good community building. If it's not for you, totally fine. And I think broadly, media has gotten very far away from kind of that basic level. You know, I kind of think of it as like the farmer's market. You know, if you go to the farmer's market and there's a guy like, yeah, this is what I make. Here it is. If you want it, cool. If not, no harm done. This is what I do.
Yeah.
So
Keep walking with your street corn. Your street corn.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So that maybe wasn't a very good sales pitch. It was all over the place, but that's where we're at with it.
Oh no, I appreciate it. I appreciate I know I've always enjoyed your work and Aaron's work, and I love the play on words too, the counter read. It's a great name for it.
Yeah, I agreed. Common fans will know that I'm a lifelong, born and raised in Lincoln, lifelong Husker fan. I currently live in Bend, Oregon, but the hard copy of the Hail Varsity magazine was coming to my house in Bend for years. So big fan of your guys' work over the years. And, all Common fans are always looking for ways to feed the addiction. So highly recommend you check out the Counter Read newsletter as one more great, excellent, well done source of Husker coverage, especially in the off season when we're all just hankering we're frothing at the mouth for any Husker coverage we can get. Well, Brandon, this has been awesome. Matt, Jeff, do you guys have anything else?
Nope, I'm good. Thanks, Brandon. We appreciate you being on with us.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me.
Appreciate your time. I know it's later there where you're at, so really appreciate you coming on.
No problem.
Thanks so much, Brandon. Everyone, check out the Counter Read newsletter. We'll be back at you again soon, Common fans. As always, GBR for life.